Abandonment to Divine Providence, Part 4. It is necessary to remark that there are souls that God keeps hidden and little in their own eyes, and in the eyes of others. Far from giving them striking qualities, his design for them is that they should remain in obscurity. They would be deceived if they desired to attempt a different way. If they are well instructed, they will recognize that fidelity to their nothingness is their right path, and they will find peace in their lowliness. The only difference, therefore, in their way and that of apparently more favored souls, is the difference they make for themselves by the amount of their love and submission to the will of God. For, if they surpass in these virtues the souls that appear to work more than they exteriorly, their sanctity is, without doubt, so much the greater. This shows that each soul ought to content itself with the duties of its state and the overruling of Providence. Clearly God exacts his equally from all. As to attraction and the impressions received by the soul, these are given by God alone to whom he pleases. One must not try to produce them oneself, nor to make efforts to increase them. Natural efforts is in direct opposition and quite contrary to infused inspirations, which should come in peace. The voice of the divine spouse will awaken the soul, which should only proceed according to the inspirations of the Holy Spirit. For, if it were to act according to its own ideas, it would make no progress. Therefore, if it should feel neither attraction nor grace to do these things that make the saints so much admired, it must, in justice to itself, say, God has willed it thus for the saints, but not for me. Section 4. God does all for a soul of good will. The conduct of a soul raised to a state of abandonment with regard to this twofold manifestation of the good pleasure of God. Souls called by God to a life of perfect abandonment resemble this respect our Lord, his Holy Mother, and Saint Joseph. The will of God was, to them, the fullness of life. Submitting entirely to this will as to precept and inspiration, directly it was made manifest to them, they were always in complete dependence on, what we might call, the purely providential will of God. From this it follows that their lives, although extraordinary in perfection, showed outwardly nothing that is not common to all and quite ordinary. They fulfilled the duties of religion and of their state as others do, and in, apparently, the same way. For the rest, if one scrutinizes their conduct, nothing can be discovered either striking or peculiar. All follows the same course of ordinary events. That which might single them out is not discernible. It is that dependence on the supreme will which arranges all things for them, and in which they habitually live. The divine will confers on them a complete self-mastery on account of this habitual submission of their hearts. Therefore, the souls in question are, by their state, both solitary and free, detached from all things in order to belong to God, to love him in peace, and to fulfill faithfully the present duty according to his expressed will. They do not allow themselves to reflect, to neglect, nor to think of consequences, causes, or reasons. It is enough for them to go on simply, accomplishing their plain duties, just as if there did not exist for them anything but their present obligation, and their duty to God. The present moment then is like a desert in which the soul sees only God whom it enjoys, and is only occupied about those things which he requires of it, leaving and forgetting all else, abandoning it to Providence. This soul, like an instrument, neither receives interiorly more than the operation of God effects passively, nor gives exteriorly more than the same operation applies actively. This interior application is accomplished by a free and active cooperation, which is, at the same time, infused and mystical. That is to say, that God, finding in this soul all the necessary qualifications for acting according to his laws, and satisfied with its good will, spares it the trouble of doing so, by bestowing all that would otherwise be the fruits of its efforts, or of its effectual good will. It is as though someone, seeing a friend preparing for a troublesome journey, would go in his stead, so that the friend would have the intention of going, but he spared the trouble of the journey. Yet by this impersonation he would have gone himself, at least virtually. This journey would be free because it would be the result of a free determination taken beforehand to please the friend who then takes upon himself the trouble and expense. It would also be active because it will be a real advance. And it will be interior because effected without outward activity, and finally, it will be mystical because of the hidden principle it contains. But to return to that kind of cooperation that we have explained by this imaginary journey, you will observe that it is entirely different from fidelity in the fulfillment of obligations. The work of fulfilling these is neither mystical nor infused, but free and active as commonly understood. Therefore, abandonment to the good pleasure of God contains activity as well as passivity. In it there is nothing of self, but a habitual general goodwill, which, like an instrument, has no action of itself, but responds to the touch of the master. While in his hands it fulfills all the purposes for which it was formed. Intentional and determined obedience to the will of God is, in the ordinary order of vigilance, care, attention, prudence, and discretion. Although ordinary efforts are sensibly aided, or begun by grace. Leaving God, then, to act for all the rest, reserve for yourself at the present moment only love and obedience, which virtues the soul will practice eternally. This love, infused into the soul in silence, is a real action of which it makes a perpetual obligation. It ought, in fact, to preserve it faithfully, and to maintain itself constantly in those dispositions resulting from it, all of which, it is evident, cannot be done without action. The action, however, is quite different to obedience and to the present duty, by which the soul so disposes its faculties as to fulfill perfectly the will of God made manifest to it exteriorly, without expecting anything extraordinary. The divine will is to the soul in all things its method, its rule, and its direct and safe way. It is an unalterable law, which is of all times, of all places, of all states. It is a straight line which the soul must follow with courage and fidelity, neither diverging to the right nor to the left, nor overstepping its bounds. Whatever is over and above must be received passively, as it carries on its work in abandonment. In a word, the soul is active in all that the present duty requires, but passive and submissive in all the rest, about which there should be no self-will, but patient waiting for the divine motion. Section 5. The common way of all souls. The soul that aims at union with God should value all the operations of His grace, but should only attach itself to that of the present moment. It is by union with the will of God that we enjoy and possess Him, and it is an illusion to endeavor to obtain this divine enjoyment by any other means. Union with the will of God is the universal means. It does not act by one method only, but all methods and all ways are, by its virtue, sanctified. The divine will unites God to our souls in many different ways, and that which suits us is always best for us. All the ways should be esteemed and loved, because in each we should behold that which is ordained by God accommodating itself to each individual soul, and selecting the most suitable method of effecting it by the divine union. The duty of the soul is to submit to this choice, and to make it none for itself, and this without dispensing itself from esteeming and loving this adorable will in its work in others. For instance, if this divine will should prevent me saying vocal prayers, having sensible devotion, or receiving light on mysteries, I should still love and esteem the silence and barrenness induced by the sight of the faith of others, while for myself I should make use of the present moment, and by it should become united to God. I should not, as the Quietists do, reduce all religion to personal inaction, despising all other means, because what makes perfection is obedience to the law of God, which always renders the means it applies suitable to the soul. No, I should not admit of obstacles or bounds to the will of God, neither should I take anything in place of it, but should welcome in it whatever way it was made manifest to me, and should revere it in whatever way it was pleased to unite itself to others. Thus all ordinary souls have but one common way, in which each is distinct and different, in order to form the variety of the mystical robe of the Church. All these souls mutually approve of and esteem each other, and all say, we are going to the same goal by different paths, and are all united in the same way, and by the same means in the ordinance of God, which is so different in each. It is in this sense that we must read the lives of the saints, or other spiritual books, without ever making a change, and forsaking our own path. For this reason it is necessary that we should neither read spiritual books, nor hold spiritual conversation unless God so will. For if he makes it the duty of the present moment, the soul, far from making any change, will be strengthened in this way, either by what it finds in conformity with its own method, or even by that in which it differs. But if the will of God does not make this reading, or spiritual intercourse a present duty, it will cause nothing but trouble and a confusion of ideas, and a succession of changes will ensue, because without the concurrence of God's will, there cannot be order in anything. Since when, therefore, have we busied ourselves with the pains and anxieties of our souls, which have nothing to do with our present duty? When will God be all in all to us? Let creatures act according to their nature, but let nothing hinder us. Let us go beyond all created things and live entirely for God. Section 6. The duty of the present moment, the only rule. From souls in this state, God exacts the most perfect docility to the action of his grace. It is necessary to be detached from all that one feels, and from all that one does, to follow this method, by which one subsists in God alone, and in the present duty. All regard to what is beyond this should be cut off as superfluous. One must restrict oneself to the present duty without thinking of the preceding one, or of the one which is to follow. I imagine the law of God to be always before you, in that the practice of abandonment has rendered your soul docile to the divine action. You feel some impulse that makes you say, I have a drawing towards this person, or I have an inclination to read a certain book, to receive or to give certain advice, to complain of certain things, to open my mind to another, or to receive confidence, to give away something, or to perform some action. Well, obey this impulse according to the inspiration of grace without stopping to reflect, to reason, or to make efforts. Give yourself up to these things for as long as God wishes, without doing so through any self-will. In the state in question, the will of God is shown to us because he dwells within us. This will ought to supplant all our usual supports. At each moment we have to practice some virtue. To this the obedient soul is faithful. Nothing of what it has learnt by reading or hearing is forgotten, and the most mortified novice could not fulfill her duties better. It is for this that these souls are attracted sometimes to one book, sometimes to another, or else to make some remark, some reflection, on what may seem but a trifling circumstance. At one time, God gives them the attention to learn something that at some future time will encourage them in the practice of virtue. Whatever these souls do, they do because they feel an attraction for it, without knowing why. All they can explain on the subject can be reduced to this: I feel myself drawn to write, to read, to ask, to examine this. I follow this attraction, and God who gives it to me keeps these particular things in reserve in my faculties to become in future the nucleus of other attractions which will become useful to myself and others. This is what makes it necessary for these souls to be simple, gentle, yielding, and submissive to the faintest breath of these scarcely perceptible impressions. In the state of abandonment, the only rule is the duty of the present moment. In this, the soul is light as a feather, liquid as water, simple as a child, active as a ball in receiving and following all the inspirations of grace. Such souls have no more consistence and rigidity than molten metal. As this takes any form according to the mold in which it is poured, so these souls are pliant and easily receptive of any form that God chooses to give them. In a word, their disposition resembles the atmosphere, which is affected by every breeze, or water, which flows into any shaped vessel, exactly filling every crevice. They are before God like a perfectly woven fabric with a clear surface, and neither think nor seek to know what God will be pleased to trace thereon, because they have confidence in him. They abandon themselves to him, and, entirely absorbed by their duty, they think not of themselves, nor of what may be necessary for them, nor of how to obtain it. The more assiduously do they apply themselves to this little work, so simple, so hidden, so secret, and outwardly contemptible, the more does God embroider and embellish it with brilliant colors. On the surface of this simple canvas of love and obedience, his hand traces the most beautiful design, the most delicate and intricate pattern, the most divine figures. Mira feci facit, Dominus sanctum suum. The Lord hath made his Holy One wonderful. Psalm 4. It is true that a canvas simply and blindly given up to the work of the pencil only feels its movement at each moment. Each blow of the hammer on the chisel can only produce one cruel mark at a time, and the stone struck by repeated blows cannot know, nor see the form produced by them. It only feels that it is being diminished, filled, cut, and altered by the chisel. And a stone that is destined to become a crucifix or a statue without knowing it, if it were asked, "What is happening to you?" would reply, if it could speak, "Do not ask me. I only know one thing, and that is to remain immovable in the hands of my Master, to love him, and to endure all that he inflicts upon me. As for the end for which I am destined, it is his business to understand how it is to be accomplished. I am as ignorant of what he is doing as of what I am destined to become. All I know is that his work is the best and the most perfect that it could be, and I receive each blow of the chisel as the most excellent thing that could happen to me, although, truth to tell, each blow, in my opinion, causes the idea of ruin, destruction, and disfigurement. But that is not my affair. Content with the present moment, I think of nothing but my duty, and I endure the work of this clever master without knowing or occupying myself about it. Yes, give to God what belongs to him, and remain lovingly passive in his hands. Hold for certain all that takes place, either interiorly or exteriorly, is best for you. Allow God to act, and abandon yourself to him. Let the chisel perform its office, the needle do its work. Let the brush of the artist cover the canvas with many tints, which only have the appearance of daubs. Correspond with all these divine operations by a simple and constant submission, a forgetfulness of self, and an assiduous application to duty. Continue thus in your own groove without studying the way, the ins and outs, the surroundings, the names or particulars of the places. Go on blindly pursuing this path, and you will be shown what is to follow. Seek only the kingdom of God and his justice by love and obedience, and all the rest will be added to you. We meet with many souls who are distressed about themselves, and inquire anxiously, who will direct us so that we may become mortified and holy, and attain perfection? Let them search in books for the description and characteristics of this marvelous work, its nature and qualities. But as for you, do you remain peacefully united to God by love, and follow blindly the clear straight path of duty? The angels are at your side during this time of darkness, and they will bear you up. If God requires more of you, he will make it known to you by his inspirations. Section 7. Trust in the guidance of God. The docile soul will not seek to learn by what road God is conducting it. When God makes himself the guide of a soul, he exacts from it an absolute confidence in him, and a freedom from any sort of disquietude as to the way in which he conducts it. The soul, therefore, is urged on without perceiving the path traced out before it. It does not imitate either what it has seen or what it has read, but proceeds by its own action, and cannot do otherwise without grave risk. The divine action is ever fresh. It never retraces its steps, but always marks out new ways. Souls that are conducted by it never know where they are going. Their ways are neither to be found in books nor in their minds. The divine action carries them step by step, and they progress only according to its movement. When you are conducted by a guide who takes you through an unknown country at night across fields where there are no tracks, by his own skill, without asking advice from anyone, or giving you any inkling of his plans, how can you choose but abandon yourself? Of what use is it, looking about to find out where you are, to ask the passers-by, or to consult maps and travelers? The plans or fancies of a guide who insists on being trusted would not allow of this. He would take pleasure in overcoming the anxiety and distrust of the soul, and would insist on an entire surrender to his guidance. If one is convinced that he is a good guide, one must have faith in him and abandon oneself to his care. The divine action is essentially good. It does not need to be reformed or controlled. It began at the creation of the world, and to the present time has manifested ever fresh energy. Its operations are without limit, its fecundity inexhaustible. It acted in one way yesterday, today it acts differently. In the same action applied at each moment to produce ever new effects, and it will extend from eternity to eternity. It has produced Abel, Noah, Abraham, all different types, Isaac, also original, and Jacob from no copy. Neither does Joseph follow any prefigure. Moses has no prototype among his progenitors. David and the prophets are quite apart from the patriarchs. St. John the Baptist stands alone. Jesus Christ is the firstborn. The apostles act more by the guidance of his Spirit than in imitation of his works. Jesus Christ did not set a limit for himself, neither did he follow all his own maxims to the letter. The Holy Spirit ever inspired his holy soul, and, being entirely abandoned to its every breath, it had no need to consult the moment that had passed, to know how to act in that which was coming. The breath of grace shaped every moment according to the eternal truths subsisting in the invisible and unfathomable wisdom of the Blessed Trinity. The soul of Jesus Christ received these directions at every moment, and acted upon them externally. The Gospel shows, in the life of Jesus Christ, a succession of these truths, and this same Jesus who lives and works always continues to live and work in the souls of his saints. If you would live according to gospel, abandon yourself simply and entirely to the action of God. Jesus Christ is its supreme mouthpiece. He was yesterday, is today, and will be forever. Hebrews 13:8. Continuing, not recommencing his life. What he has done is finished. What remains to be done is being carried on at every moment. Each saint receives a share in this divine life, and in each, Jesus Christ is different, although the same in himself. The life of each saint is the life of Jesus Christ. It is a new gospel. The cheeks of the spouse are compared to beds of flowers, to gardens filled with fragrant blossoms. The divine action is the gardener, admirably arranging the flower beds. This garden resembles no other, for among all the flowers there are no two alike, or that can be described as being of the same species, except in the fidelity with which they respond to the action of the Creator, in leaving him free to do as he pleases, and, on their side, obeying the laws imposed on them by their nature. Let God act, and let us do what he requires of us. This is the gospel. This is the general scripture, and the common law. Section 8. Great faith is necessary. This total abandonment is as simple as its effects are marvelous. Such then is the straight path to sanctity. Such is the state of perfection, and of the duties imposed by it. Such the great and incomparable secret of abandonment, a secret that is, in reality, no secret, an art without art. God, who exacts it all, has explained it clearly and made it intelligible and quite simple. What is obscure in the way of pure faith is not necessary for the soul in that way to practice. There is, in fact, nothing more easy to understand nor more luminous. The mystery is only in what is done by God. This is what takes place in the Blessed Eucharist. That which is necessary to change bread into the body of Christ is so clear and so easy that the most ignorant priest is capable of doing it. Yet it is the mystery of mysteries, where all is so hidden, so obscure, so incomprehensible, that the more spiritual and enlightened one is, the more faith is required to believe it. The way of pure faith presents much that is similar. Its effect is to enable one to find God at each moment. It is this that makes it so exalted, so mystical, so blessed. It is an inexhaustible fund of thought, of discourse, of writing. It is a whole collection and source of wonders. To produce so prodigious an effect, but one thing is necessary: to let God act and to do all that he wills according to one's state. Nothing in the spiritual life could be easier, nor more within the power of everyone. Yet nothing could be so wonderful, nor any path more obscure. To walk in it, the soul has need of great faith, all the more so as reason is always suspicious, and has always some argument against it. All its ideas are confused. There is nothing in it that reason has ever known or read about, or been accustomed to admire. It is something quite new. The prophets were saints, but this Jesus is a sorcerer, said the Jews. If the soul following their example is scandalized, it shows but little faith, and well deserves to be deprived of those wonderful things that God is so ready to work in the faithful soul. Chapter 3. The trials connected with the state of abandonment. Section 1. Unwise interference. The first trial. The obloquy and unreasonable exactions of persons with a reputation for wisdom and piety. There is no way more secure than that of abandonment, and none the more easy, sweet, clear, and less subject to illusion and error. In it, God is loved, and all Christian duties fulfilled. The sacraments are frequented, and all exterior acts of religion, which are binding to all, are performed. Superiors are obeyed, and the duties of the state of life are discharged. Temptations of the flesh, the world, and the devil are continually resisted, for none are more on their guard, or more vigilant in acquitting themselves of all their obligations than those who follow this way. If this is the case, why is it that they should be subject to so many contradictions? The most unusual of these is that when they, like other Christians, have accomplished all that the most strict theologian could exact, they are expected also to be bound to inconvenient practices to which the Church by no means obliges them, and if they do not comply, they are overcharged with laboring under illusion. But I ask, can a Christian who confines himself to the observance of God's commandments and those of the Church, and who, besides, without practicing meditation, contemplation, or spiritual reading, and without being attached to any particular form of devotion, yet attends to worldly business and to other affairs of private life, can he be wrong? One cannot presume to accuse, or even to suspect him of error. One must admit this to oneself. And while leaving the Christian of whom I am speaking in peace, it is but justice not to trouble a soul that not only fulfills the precepts at least as well as one does oneself, but whom, in addition, practices exterior acts of piety that are even unknown to others, or, if known, are treated with indifference. Prejudice goes so far as to affirm that this soul deceives itself, deludes itself because, after having submitted to all that the Church prescribes, it holds itself free to be in the condition to give itself without hindrance to the interior operations of God, and to intend to the impressions of his grace at times when no other duty intervenes to expressly compel them. In a word, they are condemned because they employ that time which others give to amusements and temporal affairs in loving God. Is not this a crying injustice? This cannot be too strongly insisted upon. If anyone keeps the ordinary course, goes to confession once a year, nothing is said about it. He is left in peace with an occasional injunction, not pressed with too much importunity, nor making it an obligation to do a little more. If he should change his ways and try to improve them, then he is overwhelmed with the counsels of his conduct, and with different methods. And if he does not follow these pious rules diligently, then he is done for. He is a subject of suspicion, and nothing too bad to predict of him. Are they not aware of these practices, however good and holy they may be, are, after all, only a way leading to divine union? Is it necessary, then, to be always on the road when one has already arrived at the goal? Nevertheless, it is this that is exacted of a soul which is supposed to be laboring under illusion. This soul has made its way, like others, at the beginning. Like them, it knew what to do, and did it faithfully. It would be vain now to attempt to keep it bound to the same practices. Since God, moved by the efforts it has made to advance with these helps, has taken it on himself to lead it to this happy union. From the time it arrived at the state of abandonment, and by love possessed God, in fine, from the time that the God of all goodness, relieving it of all its trouble and industry, made himself the principle of its operations, these first methods lost all their value, but were the road it had traversed. To insist upon these methods being resumed and constantly followed would be to make the soul forsake the end at which it had arrived to re-enter the way which led to it. But if this soul has any experience, their time and trouble will be thrown away. In vain they will pursue it with noisy clamors. Turning a deaf ear, it will remain untroubled and unmoved in that intimate peace in which so advantageously exercises its love. This is the center in which it reposes, or, if you prefer it, it is the straight line traced by the hand of God. It will continue to walk therein, for all its duties are plainly marked out in it, and by following this line it fulfills them without confusion or haste as they present themselves. For all else it holds itself in perfect liberty, always ready to obey every movement of grace directly it perceives it, and to abandon itself to the care of Providence. God makes known to this soul that he intends to be its master, and to direct it by grace, and make it understand that it cannot, without attacking the sovereign rights of its Creator, allow its own liberty to be fettered. It feels that, if it tied itself down to the rules of those who live by their own efforts and industry, instead of acting according to the attraction of grace, it would be deprived of many things necessary in order to be able to fulfill future duties. But, as no one knows this, it is judged and condemned for its simplicity. And, though it does not find fault with others, but approves of every state, and well knows how to discern every degree of progress, it is despised by pretended wiseacres who cannot appreciate this sweet and hearty submission to divine providence. Worldly wisdom cannot understand the perpetual wanderings of the apostles, who did not settle anywhere. Ordinary spirituality also cannot endure that souls should depend for their action on divine providence. There are but few in this state who approve of them. But God, who instructs men by means of their fellow creatures, never fails to make such souls encounter those who abandon themselves to him with simplicity and fidelity. Besides, these latter require less direction than others in consequence of having attained to this state with the help of very good directors. If they find that they are occasionally left to themselves, it is because divine providence removes by death, or banishes by some event, the guides who had led them in this way. Even then, they are always willing to be guided, and only wait in peace the moment arranged by Providence. During the time of privation also, they meet from time to time persons in whom they feel they can repose a confidence inspired by God, although they know nothing about them. This is a sign that he makes use of them to communicate certain lights, even if they are only temporary. The souls ask advice, therefore, and when it is given they follow it with the greatest docility. In default of such assistance, however, they have recourse to the maxims supplied by them by their first directors. Thus they are always very well directed, either by the old principles formerly received, or by the advice of those directors they encounter. They make use of all until God sends them persons in whom they can confide, and who will show them his will. Section 2. Unjust Judgments. Second trial of the state of abandonment. The apparent uselessness and exterior defects allowed by God in the souls he wills to raise to this state. The second trial of souls, conducted by God in this way, is the result of their apparent uselessness and of their exterior defects. There can be neither honor nor reward in a service hidden, often enough, under the most utter incapacity and uselessness, as far as the world is concerned. Doubtless those who are given more important posts are not, on this account, necessarily precluded from the state of abandonment. Still less is this state incompatible with striking virtue, and that sanctity which attracts universal veneration. Nevertheless, there is by far greater number of souls raised to this sublime state whose virtue is known only to God. By their state these souls are free from nearly every outward obligation. They are little suited for worldly business or affairs, for complicated concerns, or for putting their mind into the conducting of industries. It seems as though they were quite useless. Nothing is noticeable in them but feebleness of mind, body, and imagination, and passions. They take no notice of anything. They are, so to say, quite stupid, and possess nothing of that culture, study, or reflection which go to the making of a man. They are like children of nature before they are placed in the hands of masters to be formed. They have noticeable faults which, without rendering them more guilty than children, cause more offense. God takes away everything but innocence in order that they should have nothing to rely upon but him alone. The world, being in ignorance of this mystery, can only judge by appearance, and can find nothing in them to its taste, nor nothing that it values. It, therefore, rejects and despises them, and they seem to be exposed to censure from all. The more closely they are observed, the less is thought of them, and the more opposition they do encounter. No one knows what to make of them. Although some hidden voice seems to speak in their favor, yet people prefer to adhere to their own malignant prepossessions, rather than to follow this instinct, or at least to suspend their judgment. Their actions are pried in to find out their opinions, and, like the Pharisees who could not endure the actions of Jesus, they are regarded with such prejudice that everything they do appears either ridiculous or criminal. Section 3. Self-contempt. The third trial. Interior humiliations. Contemptible as they are in the eyes of others, the souls raised by God to this state are far more contemptible in their own. There is nothing either in what they do or in what they suffer that is not altogether paltry and humiliating. There is nothing striking in anything about them. All is quite ordinary, nothing but troubles and afflictions interiorly, and contradictions and disappointments exteriorly. With a feeble body requiring many alleviations and comforts, the very reverse one would think of that spirit of poverty and austerity so much admired in the saints. Neither heroic undertakings, nor fasts, large alms, nor ardent and far-reaching zeal can be discerned in them. But united to God by faith and love, they behold in themselves nothing but disorder. They despise themselves still more by comparison with those who pass for saints, and who, besides adapting themselves with the faculty to rules and methods, show nothing irregular either in their persons or actions. Therefore, their own shortcomings in this respect fill them with confusion, and are unbearable to them. It is on this account that they give way to sighs and tears, marking the grief with which they are oppressed. Let us remember that Jesus Christ was both God and man. As man he was destroyed, and as God he remained full of glory. These souls have no participation in his glory, but they share in the sadness and misery of his sufferings. Men regard them in the same way as Herod and his court regarded Jesus Christ. These poor souls, therefore, are nourished as to their senses and mind with the most disgusting food, in which they can find no pleasure. They aspire to something quite different, but all the avenues leading to the sanctity they so much desire remain closed to them. They must live on this bread of suffering, on this bread mingled with ashes, with a continual shrinking both in exterior and interior. They have formed an idea of saintliness which gives them constant and irredeemable torment. The will hungers for it, but is powerless to practice it. Why should this be, except to mortify the soul in that which is its most spiritual and intimate part, which, finding no satisfaction or pleasure in anything that happens to it, must needs place all its affection in God, who conducts it this way, for the express purpose of preventing it taking pleasure in him, anything but him alone. It seems to me that it is easy to conclude from all this that souls abandoned to God cannot occupy themselves, as others do, with desires, examinations, cares, or attachment to certain persons. Neither can they form plans, nor lay down methodical rules for their actions, or for reading. This would imply that they still had power to dispose of themselves, which would entirely exclude the state of abandonment in which they are placed. In this state they give up to God all their rights over themselves, over their words, actions, thoughts, and proceedings, over the employment of their time and everything connected with it. There remains only one desire, to satisfy the master they have chosen, to listen unceasingly to the expression of his will in order to execute it immediately. No condition can better represent this state than that of a servant who obeys every order he receives, and does not occupy his time in attending to his own affairs. These he neglects in order to serve his master at every moment. These souls should then not be distressed at their powerlessness. They are able to do much in being able to give themselves entirely to a master who is all-powerful, and able to work wonders with the feeblest of instruments as if they offer no resistance. Let us, then, endure without annoyance the humiliations entailed on us in our own eyes, and in the eyes of others, by what shows outwardly in their lives, or rather let us conceal ourselves behind these outward appearances, and enjoy God who is all ours. Let us profit by this apparent failure, by these requirements, by this caretaking and the necessity of constant nourishment and of comfort, of our ill success, of the contempt of others, of these fears, uncertainties, troubles, etc., to find all our wealth and happiness in God, who, by these means, gives himself entirely to us as our only good. God wishes to be ours in a poor way, without all those accessories of sanctity which makes others to be admired, and this is because God would have himself to be the sole food of our souls, the only object of our desires. We are so weak that if we displayed the virtues of zeal, almsgiving, poverty, and austerity, we should make them subjects for vainglory. But as it is, everything is disagreeable in order that God may be our whole satisfaction, our whole support, so that the world despises us and leaves us to enjoy our treasure in peace. God desires to be the principle of all that is holy in us, and therefore what depends on ourselves and on our active fidelity is very small and appears quite contrary to sanctity. There cannot be anything great in us in the sight of God except our passive endurance. Therefore let us think of it no more. Let us leave the care of our sanctification to God, who well knows how to effect it. It all depends on the watchful care and particular operation of divine providence, and is accomplished in a great measure without our knowledge, and even in a way that is unexpected and disagreeable to us. Let us fulfill peacefully the little duties of our active fidelity, without aspiring to those that are greater, because God does not give himself to us by reason of our own efforts. We shall become saints of God, of his grace, and of his special providence. He knows what rank to give us. Let us leave it to him, and without forming to ourselves false ideas and empty systems of sanctity, let us content ourselves with loving him unceasingly, and in pursuing with simplicity the fact he has marked out for us, where all is so mean and paltry in our eyes, and in the estimation of the world. Section 4. Distrust of Self. The fourth trial of souls in the state of abandonment, the obscurity of their state, and their apparent opposition to the will of God. For a soul that desires nothing else but the will of God, what could be more miserable than the impossibility of even being certain of loving him? Formerly it was mentally enlightened to perceive in what consisted the plan for its perfection, but it is no longer able to do so in its present state. Perfection is given to it contrary to all preconceived ideas, to all light, to all feeling. It is given by all the crosses sent by Providence, by the action of present duties, by certain attractions, which have in them no good beyond that of not leading to sin, but seem very far from the dazzling sublimity of sanctity, and all that is unusual in virtue. God and his grace are given in a hidden and strange manner, for the soul feels too weak to bear the weight of its crosses, and disgusted with its obligations. Its attractions are only for quite ordinary exercises. The ideal it has formed of sanctity reproaches it interiorly, for it means contemptible disposition. All books treating of the lives of the saints condemn it, and it can find nothing in vindication of its conduct. It beholds a brilliant sanctity which renders it disconsolate, because it has not strength sufficient to attain to it, and it does not see that its weakness is divinely ordered, but looks upon it as cowardice. Those whom it knows to be distinguished for striking virtue, of sublime contemplation, regarding it only with contempt. What a strange saint, say they. And the soul, believing this, is confused by its countless useless efforts to raise itself from this low condition, is overwhelmed with opprobrium, and has nothing to advance in its own favor either to itself or to others. The soul in this state feels as if it were lost. Its reflections afford it no help for its guidance or enlightenment, and divine grace seems to have failed it. It is, however, through its loss that it may find again that same grace, substituted under a different form, and restoring 100-fold more than it took away by the purity of its hidden impressions. This is, without doubt, a death blow to the soul, for it loses sight of the divine will which, so to speak, withdraws itself from observation to stand behind it and push it on, becoming thus its invisible principle, and no longer its clearly defined object. Experience proves that nothing kindles the desire than this apparent loss. Therefore the soul vehemently desires to be united to the divine will, and gives vent to the most profound sighs, finding no possible consolation anywhere. A heart that has no other wish but to possess God must attract him to itself. And this secret of love is the very great one, since by this way alone are established in the soul sure faith and firm hope. It is then that we believe what we cannot see, and expect to possess what we cannot feel. Oh, how much more does this incomprehensible conduct of an action, of which one is both subject and instrument, tend to one's perfection without any visible sign of appearance? Everything that one does seems done by chance or natural inclination, and is very humiliating to the soul. When inspired to speak, it seems as if one spoke only from oneself. One never sees by what spirit one is impelled. The most divine inspiration is a terror, and whatever one does or feels is a source of constant contempt, as though it were all faulty and imperfect. Others are always admired, and one feels very inferior to them, while their whole way of acting causes confusion. The soul distrusts its own judgment, and cannot be certain about any of its thoughts. It pays excessive submission to the least advice given by respectable authority, and the divine action, in thus keeping it apart from the striking virtue, seems to plunge it into deeper humiliation. This humiliation has no appearance of virtue to the soul. According to its own idea, it is pure justice. The most admirable thing about it is that in the eyes of others whom God does not enlighten, and even in its own eyes, the soul appears actuated by feelings absolutely contrary to virtue, such as pure obstinacy, disobedience, troublesomeness, contempt, and indignation, which seems there is no remedy. The more earnestly the soul arrives to overcome these defects, the more do they increase, because they form part of that design of God as being the most suitable means of detaching the soul from itself to prepare it for the divine union. It is from this sad trial that the principal merit of the state of abandonment is gained. Now all is of a nature to withdraw the soul from its narrow path of love and simple obedience, and it requires heroic virtue and courage to keep firm in plain active fidelity, and to sing its part in a song that seems to express in its tones that the soul is mistaken and lost, while grace sings a second. It does not hear this, however, and if it has courage to let the thunder roll, the lightning flash, and the tempest roar, and to walk with a firm tread in the path of love and obedience, of duty, and of the present attraction, it can be compared to the soul of Jesus during his passion, when our divine Savior walked steadfastly in the fulfilling of the will of his Father, and in his love which imposed upon him a task apparently quite inconsistent with the dignity of a soul of such sanctity as his. The hearts of Jesus and Mary, bearing the fury of that darkest of nights, let the clouds gather and the storm rage. A multitude of things in appearance most opposed to the designs of God and of his order overwhelmed their faculties. But though deprived of all sensible support, they walked without faltering in the path of love and obedience. Their eyes were fixed only on what they had to do, and leaving God to act as they pleased with all that concerned them, they endured the whole weight of that divine action. They groaned under the burden, but not a single instant did they waver or pause. They believed that all would be well, provided that they kept on their way and let God act.